In November of 2022, a chilling mystery unfolded in the small town of Rome, Georgia. Aaron Davis, a recent college graduate, had set off to visit his longtime friend, 21-year-old Brandon Risner. Aaron's trip was meant to be a celebration of the new chapter in his life. But it would turn into something much darker. The story began with a seemingly normal visit. Aaron was supposed to visit Brandon and then head to Alabama to see his girlfriend. However, something went terribly wrong. The next morning, Aaron's car was found abandoned in a creek near Rome. It was a Toyota Prius. Its lights still on but the engine off. There was no sign of Aaron. The mystery deepened when police discovered that Aaron's phone was going straight to voicemail. His father, Jeremy Davis, was desperate for answers. He couldn't understand why Aaron hadn't called or returned messages. As time passed, Jeremy began to grow worried that something was very wrong. With no clues and no sign of Aaron, the police turned their attention to Brandon. He was the last person known to have been with Aaron. The two had been friends since middle school, and Aaron had just spent the previous evening with Brandon, celebrating his recent college graduation. When the police contacted Brandon, he seemed genuinely concerned about his friend's disappearance. He told them that Aaron had gotten sick after they had been drinking together and had insisted on being left alone. He claimed that he left Aaron around 1 or 2 a.m. and that when he woke up, Aaron's car was gone. It seemed like a plausible story, but the officers began to have doubts. As the hours passed with no sign of Aaron, and with Brandon's story not quite adding up, the police were left with more questions than answers. What happened that night? Why hadn't Aaron called anyone? And why was Brandon's behavior starting to look suspicious? As the investigation into Aaron's disappearance continued, police grew increasingly suspicious of Brandon Risner's story. His calm demeanor during questioning and the odd details he provided about the night Aaron went missing were starting to raise red flags. Brandon told police that he and Aaron had been drinking wine together the afternoon before Aaron's disappearance. According to him, Aaron had gotten sick and went upstairs, while he continued to drink downstairs. Brandon claimed that he went to bed after Aaron had told him to leave him alone. And when he woke up the next morning, Aaron was gone. But the officers began to notice inconsistencies in Brandon's story. Why had Aaron's car been abandoned in a creek? Why wasn't Aaron answering his phone? To get more answers, police decided to search Brandon's house. What they found inside only deepened their suspicions. When they entered the home, they immediately noticed a strong chemical odor in the air. As they walked through the house, they came across a locked door leading to Aaron's room, the very room where Brandon had claimed Aaron had gotten sick. This raised an alarm for the officers. Why had Brandon locked that door? When they finally entered Aaron's room, they were met with an unsettling sight. There were large bloodstains next to the bed. It wasn't just a small amount, but a significant pool of blood, suggesting something far more sinister than a simple drunken episode. The blood seemed to have been there for a while, raising further questions about the timeline of events. But it wasn't just the blood that caught the officers' attention. They discovered an excessive amount of cleaning supplies, almost as if Brandon had been trying to scrub away evidence. The officers also found signs that Aaron had been violently ill, but the blood was an alarming indication that something much worse had happened. As they continued to examine the room, they found more signs that made it clear this wasn't an ordinary case of a missing person. There were traces of powder in the room, and it appeared that Brandon had been trying to clean up something. The officers were now certain that something had gone terribly wrong that night. Brandon's strange behavior, combined with the disturbing evidence found in his home, led the police to one conclusion: they were dealing with more than just a missing person. It seemed that Aaron Davis had met a violent end, but before they could confront Brandon with the evidence, something unexpected happened. Brandon suddenly ran. He jumped over a fence and fled from the house, disappearing into the nearby neighborhood. The police were caught off guard, and for a few moments, they lost sight of him. But with their suspicions now confirmed, the search for Brandon became a priority. What had he done? Where was Aaron? And was Brandon about to flee the town forever? Brandon's sudden flight from the police only deepened the mystery surrounding his involvement in Aaron's disappearance. Officers were left scrambling as they tried to track him down, but the clues were slim. They knew one thing for certain: Brandon was on the run. And he wasn't planning on coming back quietly. As Brandon evaded capture, his father, Jeremy Risner, found himself caught between helping the police and protecting his son. Jeremy had been cooperating with the investigation from the very beginning, desperately trying to help find Aaron. He had even spent hours driving around town with the police, hoping to get some information that could lead to Aaron's whereabouts. But everything changed when Jeremy found something that made him question his son's innocence: Brandon's phone. While searching around the house, Jeremy discovered Brandon's phone, which had been left behind in the chaos. At first, he hoped it might contain clues that could help police locate his son. But when he went through the phone, Jeremy found messages that would forever alter the course of the investigation. Some of the texts were deeply troubling. They weren't just casual messages between friends. They were chilling notes that suggested Brandon's involvement in something far darker. The messages spoke of violence and sickness. One of them reading, "His scream became a gargle as he swallowed his tongue." There was also a disturbing to-do list, which included cleaning up, making his bed, and texting someone about Aaron's condition. The most shocking part of all was a note that simply said, "I like dark places where my mind melts." These cryptic and unsettling messages raised serious concerns about Brandon's state of mind. But they also painted a picture of a man hiding something terrible. Jeremy, clearly shaken by what he found on the phone, suddenly became reluctant to hand it over to the police. He felt conflicted. Was he protecting his son? Or was he preventing authorities from uncovering the full truth? His actions seemed to suggest that he had already made up his mind about Brandon's guilt. But he wasn't ready to share it with the police. After keeping the phone to himself for a while, Jeremy finally called the police to report that Brandon had returned home and was willing to surrender. He had reached a breaking point. The weight of the evidence on Brandon's phone was too much to ignore. Jeremy knew that his son was in trouble, but he wasn't ready to let him face the consequences alone. It was a moment of clarity for Jeremy. He had spent the day desperately trying to find Aaron and help the police. But the discovery of Brandon's phone changed everything. In his heart, Jeremy now knew the horrible truth. His son was involved in Aaron's death. With this realization, he was ready to let go of the last bit of hope and do what was necessary for justice to be served. Less than an hour later, Brandon and his parents arrived at the police station. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for, Brandon's capture. But what happened next would only add to the shocking and tragic nature of the case. After Brandon was handed over to the police, the investigation took a dark turn. Brandon's parents, especially his father Jeremy, had done everything they could to help the authorities, but it was clear that Jeremy had begun to suspect his son's involvement in the tragic events. With Brandon now in police custody, the detectives focused on one crucial task: finding Aaron's body. The breakthrough came when Jeremy, in an attempt to assist further, provided police with new information. He described a location that Brandon had once mentioned in passing, an old, secluded cemetery. Jeremy's recollections seemed vague, but it was enough for the detectives to act on. This new lead, however uncertain, gave the search team a place to start. With the tip in hand, the police moved quickly, organizing a search of the cemetery. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for. In the back of the cemetery, hidden behind a secluded area, they discovered a freshly dug grave. When they unearthed the body, they made a horrifying discovery: Aaron Davis's body, wrapped in the very sheets from Brandon's house. The sheets were soaked in blood, an unmistakable sign of foul play. The manner in which Aaron's body had been treated left no doubt in the investigators' minds. This wasn't an accidental death or a tragedy caused by a drunken mistake. This was cold, deliberate murder. The police immediately arrested Brandon for the murder of his longtime friend, Aaron Davis. The nature of the crime shocked everyone who knew the two young men. They had been best friends for years, and their friendship seemed unbreakable. The revelation that Brandon had not only killed Aaron but also tried to cover up the crime was a devastating blow to the community. Brandon's calm and detached behavior while being arrested only intensified the mystery. He appeared unaffected by the enormity of what he had done, which left the officers with even more questions. Brandon's actions during the arrest, and the fact that he had calmly disposed of his best friend's body, painted a chilling portrait of a cold-blooded killer. What could have driven him to kill Aaron, someone he had known and loved for so long? Was it a crime of passion, a momentary lapse in judgment, or something deeper and more sinister? With Aaron's body found and the evidence against Brandon mounting, the police were now certain that they had uncovered the truth. But what they didn't know yet was that Brandon's behavior and the messages found on his phone would reveal a deeper, more disturbing side to the young man they thought they knew. The full picture of the murder was starting to come together, but it was only the beginning of the unsettling details that would unfold in the days ahead. As the police continued their investigation, the full extent of Brandon Risner's crime began to unravel. With Aaron Davis's body discovered and the evidence mounting against him, Brandon's fate seemed all but sealed. Yet, the case wasn't over yet. The real shock came during his trial, as Brandon's chilling behavior and the disturbing details of his actions were revealed in court. In the days following his arrest, Brandon's demeanor remained eerily calm. He showed no outward signs of remorse for the murder of his longtime friend. Aaron. His detachment was unsettling, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, including the bloodstains in his house and the gruesome messages found on his phone. Brandon continued to maintain his silence, choosing not to speak about the crime. The defense team tried to argue that Brandon had been struggling with mental health issues, suggesting that his actions might have been influenced by anxiety or other psychological factors. They even attempted to raise the possibility of an insanity plea, hoping to mitigate the severity of his punishment. However, the court was not convinced. The disturbing nature of the crime, including the brutal murder, the strange and unsettling texts Brandon had sent, and his complete lack of emotion throughout the investigation, made it clear that this wasn't a crime of temporary insanity. Brandon had planned and executed the murder with cold precision, and his actions showed a clear intent to harm. When the case went to trial, Brandon's guilty plea sealed his fate. He admitted to the murder of Aaron Davis, though the full reasoning behind the crime remained a mystery. What had driven Brandon to kill his best friend, someone he had known and loved for years? The court was left with unanswered questions about his motives. Ultimately, the judge ruled that justice required a life sentence. On July 18, 2024, Brandon Risner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder and mutilation of Aaron Davis. There was no chance for redemption. Brandon's fate was sealed. His crime had been heinous, and the impact on Aaron's family was immeasurable. Aaron's parents, devastated by the loss of their son, had to come to terms with the horror of knowing that the person who had taken their son's life was once someone Aaron had trusted and loved. The family, though heartbroken, found some sense of closure knowing that Brandon would never be free again. For Brandon, the courtroom had become the place where his dark secret was exposed to the world. His actions, the chilling messages on his phone, and his cold, emotionless behavior spoke volumes about the kind of person he had become. The young man who once had everything to look forward to in life had thrown it all away, taking his best friend's life in the process. In the end, Brandon's story became a tragic reminder of how betrayal and darkness can lurk behind even the closest of relationships. The murder of Aaron Davis remains a haunting case, a reminder of the evil that can sometimes lie hidden in plain sight, even in the people we trust the most.